Senior observer Velkareth had cataloged for 1,000 starships in his 300-year career, and he believed, with the quiet arrogance of an old professional, that nothing in known space could still surprise him. He was wrong. It began as a ripple, a distortion in the gravitic sensors so large that his first assumption was equipment failure. He tapped the console twice, recalibrated, and ran the scan again. The ripple didn't vanish. It grew, somewhere beyond the orbit of humanity's home system. Space itself seemed to bend around something that should not exist. Velkareth's 4 analytical drones snapped to attention around his chair, their optical sensors flickering red. "Confirm anomaly," he said, voice tight. "Cross-reference against the Galactic Registry." The registry's search returned nothing. No match, no classification, no precedent. That alone should have been impossible. Every vessel above corvette size, belonging to any of the Council's 41-member species, was logged, measured, and filed the moment it left the shipyard. Humanity, as a new probationary member of the Council, had agreed to the same transparency requirements as everyone else. Their fleet was small, modest, unthreatening, 12 frigates, 6 cruisers, 1 aging carrier. Velkareth had memorized the list himself. So what exactly was tearing a hole in the fabric of space 30 light minutes from Earth? The object completed its transition from faster than light. Sensors screamed. Velkareth's console lit up with cascading errors, as the scale of the reading refused to resolve into anything sane. Length, 11 kilometers. Mass, 14 million tons. Hull composition, unknown alloy, layered in a pattern his systems had never cataloged. It dwarfed the largest capital ship in the entire Galactic Council fleet by a factor of 6. Velkareth's hands trembled over the controls, an old organic habit he'd never fully suppressed despite centuries of cybernetic augmentation. He opened a priority channel to Council Command, his voice unsteady for the first time in decades. "This is Observer Post 17. I am detecting an unregistered capital-scale vessel in Terran space. Repeat, unregistered. This does not match anything in the treaty filings." Then he did what any careful observer would do. He hailed the object directly, half expecting silence, half expecting a threat. Neither came. A calm, measured voice filled his calm, layered with none of the panic Velkareth felt radiating through his own systems. "Unidentified Council vessel. This is the UES Leviathan. We read you. Please state your intentions." Velkareth froze. UEs. United Earthships. Human. The pieces refused to fit together. Humanity's fleet was small. Humanity's fleet was known. And yet 11 kilometers of impossible warships sat in the void before him, broadcasting a designation that belonged, unmistakably, to a species the rest of the galaxy has spent decades quietly underestimating. "Leviathan," Velkareth finally managed. "Please confirm. You claim to be a human vessel?" "Confirmed," the voice replied, unbothered. "Commander Laura Holt, UES Leviathan at your service." Velkareth's drones began recording everything, feeding it back to Council Command in real time. He could already imagine the chaos that would erupt across 41 member worlds within the hour. A species barely 3 decades into interstellar contact, still on probationary status, still bound by strict military limitations under the Unification Treaty, and they had built this without anyone noticing. The question that gripped Velkareth wasn't simply how. It was why hadn't they told anyone? And beneath that question sat a colder, more dangerous one, the kind that had toppled alliances and started wars across galactic history. If humanity had hidden something this massive, what else were they hiding? Was the Leviathan a singular anomaly, or the first visible piece of an arsenal built in total secrecy, right under Council's nose? Velkareth requested emergency clearance to approach. Permission was granted within minutes. Council Command wanted eyes on this immediately, and Velkareth, despite his unease, was the closest qualified observer in the sector. As the scout vessel closed the distance, the true scale of the Leviathan became impossible to ignore. Weapon emplacements lined its hull in overlapping rows, more than his sensors could individually count. Multiple independent reactor cores pulsed beneath armored plating thick enough to swallow direct hits that would vaporize anything in the Council's current fleet. It wasn't just big. It was saturated with lethal capability. Redundant systems layered atop redundant systems. as if built by engineers who assumed every single component might fail and planned accordingly. Velkareth had studied military architecture for 3 centuries. He recognized overkill when he saw it. This wasn't a ship meant to win a battle. This was a ship meant to make battle unthinkable. His scout drifted closer, dwarfed to the point of absurdity beside the towering hull, and Velkareth found himself doing something he rarely did anymore. He felt genuine fear, cold and unfamiliar, crawling up through his augmented nervous system, because somewhere behind that hull, humanity was watching him back. And they hadn't fired a single shot. Not yet. The silence stretching between the 2 vessels felt heavier than any threat could have been, and Velkareth understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever came next would decide humanity's entire future among the stars. Within the hour, 41 member worlds knew the name UES Leviathan, and none of them liked what they knew. Velkareth sat in the observation lounge of his scout vessel, still docked a respectful distance from the colossal warship, watching diplomatic channels erupt into controlled chaos. The Unification Treaty, signed only 6 years ago when humanity joined the Council on probationary terms, was explicit. No member species could maintain warships exceeding 2 million tons displacement without Council oversight and multilateral approval. The Leviathan was 14 million tons. "This is a treaty violation," snapped Ambassador Tavrik of the Drenari Assembly, his voice crackling across the emergency session feed. "A blatant, deliberate violation. Humanity signed the same agreement as the rest of us." Velkareth listened in silence, running calculations he didn't want to run. If this truly was a violation, the Council's response protocols were unambiguous. Sanctions, potential military intervention, possible expulsion. 6 years of careful diplomatic progress could unravel in a single session. Then a new voice entered the channel, unhurried, almost gentle in its calm. "If I may..." The feed identified the speaker. "Owen Clark, senior human diplomat to the Galactic Council." "Ambassador Tavrik raises a fair concern," Clark continued. "So let's address it with facts rather than alarm. The Unification Treaty was signed on the 14th of Terra March, 6 years ago. Construction of the UES Leviathan began 19 years before that date." The channel went quiet. "In other words," Clark said, "the ship you're looking at was laid down under Earth's own sovereign authority, over a decade before humanity had even made first contact with this council, let alone signed any treaty limiting our military capacity. We built the Leviathan while we were still alone in the universe, gentlemen, before any of you existed to us, before any agreement existed to violate." Velkareth pulled a treaty archive himself, cross-referencing construction timelines against the shipyard registries humanity had voluntarily submitted upon joining. Clark was right. Technically, unambiguously right. The keel of the Leviathan had been laid decades before the ink dried on the Unification Treaty. "This is a technicality," Tavrik shot back, though his voice had lost some of its earlier fire. "The spirit of the treaty." "The spirit of the treaty," Clark interrupted, still calm, "was that humanity would not build new capital-scale threats after joining this council. We haven't. The Leviathan isn't new. It's simply the first time we brought it out of dry dock." A pause. "We didn't hide a violation from you, Ambassador. We disclose an asset that predates your jurisdiction over us entirely." Velkareth felt something shift in his understanding of humanity, subtle but significant. This wasn't recklessness. This wasn't a species that stumbled into overwhelming power by accident. Someone, decades ago, had looked at an uncertain future and decided to build insurance on a scale nobody else had imagined necessary. "Why now?" asked a different voice, Counselor Ithra of the Vashi Collective, quieter, more curious than accusatory. "If this ship has existed for years, why reveal it today?" Clark's answer came without hesitation. "Because the Leviathan has a scheduled duty. In 11 hours, it will begin escorting a joint humanitarian convoy through the Kessin Corridor, a route that has suffered 6 pirate raids in the past 2 years, with heavy council casualties each time. We felt it was time our allies understood exactly what would be protecting that convoy, rather than being startled by an unmarked contact." Velkareth's drones quietly logged every word, and he found himself struck by the deliberate transparency of it. Humanity hadn't been forced to reveal the Leviathan. They had chosen to on their own timeline, framed not as a threat, but as an offering, protection for a corridor that had cost Council lives for years. Still, the Council session did not come easily. Multiple delegates demanded a full technical inspection. Others called for immediate sanctions regardless of the treaty's legal wording, arguing that intent mattered more than paperwork. The debate stretched for hours, fracturing along old political lines. Fear and suspicion tangled with genuine uncertainty about what this discovery meant for the balance of power across the galaxy. Velkareth was assigned, by unanimous vote, as lead technical observer. His task: conduct a full capability assessment of the Leviathan and report back with an honest evaluation of the threat it posed. He accepted the assignment with a knot of anxiety in his chest. 3 centuries of experience had taught him to trust data over rhetoric, evidence over fear. But as he prepared his scout for a closer approach, authorized this time by Commander Holt herself, he couldn't shake a growing, uncomfortable realization. If the Leviathan really had been built entirely outside Council oversight, with no one watching, no one auditing, no one limiting its design, then its true capabilities might be far beyond anything the treaty numbers suggested. And Velkareth was about to find out exactly how far. His scout's engines hummed to life. Ahead of him, docking clamps extended from the Leviathan's hull, an invitation and a warning wrapped into a single gesture: come closer and see what we built. He accepted. The docking clamps locked with shudder Velkareth felt through his entire hull, and for a moment he questioned whether accepting this assignment had been wisdom or foolishness. He was not here for a tour. Not yet. Council command had made his priority clear: a full combat capability assessment, conducted independently, verified against every offensive and defensive method available. Before humanity showed him anything of their philosophy, the galaxy needed to know exactly what the Leviathan could do in a fight. Commander Laura Holt met him personally at the analysis bay, human, mid-40s by Velkareth's estimation, with the unhurried composure of someone who had commanded far too many crises to be rattled by an alien observer's scrutiny. You'll have full sensor access, she said. Passive systems only, no weapons telemetry beyond what's needed for your report. Standard protocol for outside audits. Standard protocol, Velkareth repeated, unable to keep the disbelief from his vocal modulator. You have a standard protocol for this? Holt almost smiled. We've done internal audits for 20 years. Observer, you're just the first outsider. Velkareth spent the next 6 hours buried in data, and each hour eroded a little more of his composure. The Leviathan carried 4 independent fusion reactor cores, any single one of which could power the entire vessel alone, meaning 3 complete reactor failures could occur before the ship lost primary power. Its armor was layered in alternating bands of ablative composite and reactive plating, a design that made simple brute force bombardment almost meaningless. Even sustained fire that breached the outer layer would detonate against a secondary buffer before reaching anything vital. Its weapons were worse, or better, depending entirely on which side of the barrels you stood. Point defense arrays numbered in the hundreds, capable of intercepting incoming projectiles and missiles with an efficiency Velkareth's simulations rated above 98%. Primary batteries, heavy rail cannons, and directed energy weapons layered across the hull in overlapping firing arcs could theoretically engage 40 separate targets simultaneously, without any single system operating at capacity. Velkareth ran the numbers 3 times, distrusting his own conclusions. Then he brought them before an emergency joint session of the Council's military committee, projected via hologram to delegates from all 41 member worlds. The chamber, usually filled with argumentative crosstalk, fell into an uneasy hush as his data populated the display. To be direct, Velkareth said, I modeled a full engagement scenario. The combined battle fleets of the 5 largest Council military powers, over 300 capital ships total, against the Leviathan alone, and prompted Admiral Ferrens of the Coalition fleet, arms crossed, clearly expecting reassurance. The Leviathan loses, Velkareth said. Eventually, overwhelming numbers do, in the end, overcome any single vessel, however powerful. He paused, letting the relief settle across the chamber for exactly as long as it took to deliver his next sentence. My models estimate the combined fleet would lose between 140 and 190 ships in the process, nearly 2/3 of the engaged force. Before the Leviathan's core is breached, the silence that followed was absolute. That's Ferentz's voice faltered. That can't be accurate. I ran it 3 times, Velkareth said quietly. The margin for error is narrow. Even in the most optimistic scenario for the Council fleet, casualties remain catastrophic. In the most pessimistic scenario, the Leviathan survives the engagement entirely, and the attacking fleet ceases to exist as an effective fighting force. Ambassador Tavrek, who had led the loudest calls for sanctions, sat back in his chair, the color visibly draining from his face. You're saying no reasonable military action could contain this ship. I'm saying, Velkareth corrected carefully, that any military action against a Leviathan would be a Pyrrhic victory at best and a catastrophic defeat at worst. There is no scenario in my modeling where engaging this vessel is a rational strategic choice, not for any single council power, and not for a coalition of them. A junior delegate from the Vashi Collective raised a trembling hand. Then what stops it? If we can't fight it, what stops a Leviathan from simply doing whatever it wants? Velkareth had asked himself the same question through every hour of his analysis, turning it over with growing unease. He looked at the data again. The reactors, the armor, the weapons, the sheer, deliberate excess of destructive capability built into a single hull. Nothing stops it, he admitted. Nothing we possess. The only thing standing between that ship and total dominance of this sector is the restraint of the people who built it. The chamber erupted into fresh argument. Delegates shouting over one another about verification, about safeguards, about demanding humanity dismantle a vessel the Council had no actual power to compel them to dismantle. Velkareth barely heard any of it. His mind was fixed on a single, uncomfortable truth his data had forced him to confront. The galaxy's balance of power hadn't just shifted. It had been quietly rewritten years ago, without anyone's knowledge or consent, and humanity had simply chosen, for reasons Velkareth did not yet understand, never to use that power at all. He needed to understand why. And so, when Commander Holt's voice returned over his comm, offering something he hadn't expected, a personal tour, an explanation, a chance to see the ship not as a weapon on paper, but as the people who served aboard understood it, Velkareth accepted without hesitation. If he was going to recommend anything to the Council, he needed to know exactly what kind of people held this much power in their hands. The escort mission began exactly on schedule, and Velkareth found himself standing on the Leviathan's command deck as it happened, an honor. Holt informed him dryly that no non-human had ever been granted before. The humanitarian convoy assembled at the edge of the Kessin corridor. 11 slow, heavily laden transport ships carrying medical supplies and refugee support equipment bound for a war-displaced colony 3 systems away. Small, vulnerable, exactly the kind of target that had drawn 6 brutal pirate raids over the past 2 years, each one costing Council escort ships and civilian lives in equal measure. The Leviathan took position at the convoy's flank, not at its head. Velkareth noted the choice immediately. You're not leading them. We don't need to, Holt said, studying the tactical display. Everyone in this sector already knows exactly what's flying beside that convoy. Positioning ourselves defensively rather than aggressively send a message we care about. What message? That we're here to protect, not to conquer. She glanced at him. You've spent 6 hours studying what we can destroy. Observer. I'd like to spend the next hour showing you what we built to prevent from being destroyed. She led him from the command deck through corridors that felt less like a warship and more, disorientingly, like a small city. Medical bays 3 times larger than combat efficiency would require. Extensive life support redundancy systems clearly designed to keep every single crew member alive through catastrophic damage, not simply to keep the ship combat functional. Escape pod capacity that exceeded total crew complement by a wide margin. This is inefficient, Velkareth observed, running quiet calculations. By pure military logic, this space could house additional weapon systems or armor plating. By pure military logic, sure, Holt agreed, but that's not what we built this ship for. She stopped in an observation window overlooking one of the reactor cores, its containment field glowing a steady, contained blue. Every one of our 4 reactors is independently shielded, independently cooled, independently controlled. Any one of them alone could power this entire ship. Do you know why we built it that way? Velkareth considered the engineering logic. Redundancy against combat damage. Partly, Holt said, but mostly it's so that even if 3 of our reactors are destroyed in battle, we can still safely evacuate every single person aboard before the 4th fails. We didn't design this ship to keep fighting no matter the cost. We designed it so our people never have to pay that cost in the first place. They continued through the vessel. Layered armor sections, Holt explained, were engineered specifically to absorb and disperse damage rather than simply resist it. Point defense networks calibrated to intercept threats before they could ever reach the crew decks. Entire sections dedicated to disaster response and civilian evacuation protocols that had never once been triggered by combat. Every weapon on this ship, Holt said finally, as they reached an observation deck overlooking the convoy formation outside, exists for one purpose. Not conquest, not domination, deterrence. She turned to face him directly. We learned, a long time ago in our own history, that peace built on hope is fragile. Peace built on strength, genuine, undeniable strength, paired with absolute restraint, tends to last. But you have the power to conquer entire systems, Velkareth said, unable to keep old suspicion from his voice. How can the rest of the galaxy simply trust that you never will? Holt's expression didn't waver. You can't trust a promise, observer. Words are cheap. But you can trust 20 years of evidence. This ship has existed for 2 decades. In that time, it has fired its weapons exactly 4 times, always defensively, always to protect a target that cannot protect itself, and always with meticulous documentation submitted for review by anyone who asked. She gestured to the convoy beyond the viewport. That's what trust actually looks like, not the absence of power, the consistent, verifiable choice not to abuse it. Velkareth found himself without an immediate response. His entire species' military doctrine was built on the assumption that overwhelming power inevitably corrupted its holder, that any species capable of building something like a Leviathan would eventually be tempted to use it for conquest. It was a foundational fear behind nearly every treaty the Council had ever drafted. And yet here he stood, aboard the single most powerful warship in known space, being shown medical bays and evacuation pods, and reactor redundancies designed explicitly to protect life rather than end it. Why show me this? He asked quietly. Why not simply let the Council fear what it doesn't understand? Fear alone would guarantee you're never challenged. Holt considered the question for a long moment. Because fear is a terrible foundation for peace. Observer. It breeds paranoia, arms races, preemptive strikes born of misunderstanding. We'd rather the galaxy understand exactly what we are and choose to trust us than fear what we might be and choose to strike first out of panic. She looked back out at the convoy, steady and unafraid. Besides, you're about to see exactly what that trust looks like in practice. We're entering the Kessin corridor in 11 minutes. This is where the pirates usually hit. Velkareth felt something tighten in his systems. Not quite fear this time, but sharp anticipation. For the first time since detecting that impossible signal in the void, he found himself curious rather than afraid. He wanted to see what happened next. 11 minutes later, the convoy crossed into the Kessin corridor, and Velkareth watched the tactical display fill with new contacts almost immediately. Multiple vessels, bearing 217, announced a young human tactical officer, her voice tight with focus but not panic. Signatures matched the Kessin Raider fleet. Confirmed hostile, previous engagement history. Velkareth pulled the fleet's history from Council archives as the contacts resolved on screen. The Kessin Raiders were no minor threat. A well-organized pirate coalition responsible for 6 devastating attacks on this exact corridor over 2 years, leaving dozens of Council escort crew dead and untold civilian casualties among the refugees, and supply crews they preyed upon. Previous Council patrols, including armed cruiser escorts, had failed to deter them even once. 19 Raider vessels emerged from a debris field they'd clearly used as cover before, moving into intercept formation with the practiced coordination of a fleet that had done this many times and won. Convoy shields at full, Holt ordered calmly, not a trace of urgency in her voice. Hold position on the flank. Do not power weapons. Velkareth turned to her sharply. Don't power weapons? Commander, they're moving into attack formation. I know, Holt said. Watch. The Leviathan did nothing but exist. It didn't accelerate. It didn't raise shields to visibly higher output. It didn't so much as adjust its position relative to the convoy. 11 kilometers of humanity's most powerful warship simply drifted alongside 11 transport vessels, its silhouette alone filling nearly a third of the tactical display. On the Raider fleet's approach vector, something changed. Lead Raider vessel decelerating. The tactical officer reported, a note of surprise entering her voice. Second vessel, third. Commander, the entire formation is breaking off. Velkareth watched the display in disbelief as all 19 pirate vessels mid-approach reversed course entirely. No weapons had been fired. No threats exchanged over comms. The Leviathan hadn't so much as acknowledged their presence with a single active sensor sweep beyond standard tracking. They're running, Velkareth said, almost to himself. They're surviving, Holt corrected gently. There's a difference. These raiders have hit Council escorts a dozen times and won every time. They know exactly what a cruiser can do, exactly what a patrol frigate can do, exactly what force they can overcome. What they're looking at right now is something their entire tactical experience tells them cannot be survived, let alone beaten. She watched the retreating contacts fade from active engagement range. They didn't need a warning shot. The math already told them everything they needed to know. Velkareth sat with that for a long moment, watching 19 ships that had terrorized this corridor for 2 years vanish back into the debris field, without a single weapon discharged. Every previous Council escort mission through Kessin had ended in casualties. This one was ending in silence. How many lives did that just save? He asked quietly. Impossible to say precisely, Holt admitted. But based on their previous raid patterns, likely dozens of convoy crew, plus whatever civilian population they'd have targeted afterward if they'd successfully broken through here. She finally allowed herself something close to satisfaction. This is the 4th time the Leviathan has escorted a convoy through contested space. It's the 4th time we haven't had to fire a shot. Velkareth pulled the historical record himself, cross-referencing against the Council's own incident database, and found Holt's account confirmed in full. For escort missions, for bloodless resolutions, dozens of hostile contacts that chose retreat over engagement each and every time. The pattern was undeniable, documented, verifiable by anyone who cared to check. He thought back to his own analysis in the Council chamber, the grim mathematics of a fleet engagement that would cost the Council over 100 ships to defeat this vessel. He had presented that data as a warning, a reason for fear. Watching 19 hardened raiders flee without a shot fired, he understood it differently now. The Leviathan's true power had never been about what it could destroy. It was about what it could prevent from ever happening at all, an entire category of violence, quietly erased from possibility, simply because both sides understood the outcome before a single weapon was ever raised. 20 years, Velkareth murmured, watching the convoy continue its peaceful passage through the corridor. 20 years, and this is what you've done with a ship powerful enough to conquer star systems. This is what we built it to do. Holt said simply, nothing more, nothing less. Velkareth found himself, for the first time in his 3 centuries of careful, skeptical observation, genuinely uncertain what to feel, all warred with lingering unease, and beneath both, something unfamiliar was taking root, the early, cautious shape of trust. He had come aboard this ship to measure a threat. He was leaving having witnessed something closer to a promise, kept quietly and consistently, one uneventful convoy escort at a time. His report to the Council would need to say something very different from what he'd originally planned. 3 days later, Velkareth stood before the full Galactic Council, 41-member worlds watching through hologram feeds as he prepared to deliver the most consequential report of his career. The chamber was tense in a way he hadn't experienced since humanity's initial contact negotiations. Delegates who had spent the past week debating sanctions, inspections, and containment strategies now waited to hear whether their newest, most alarming discovery represented a threat to be contained or something else entirely. 6 days ago, Velkareth began, I detected an unregistered vessel of unprecedented scale in Terran space. My initial assessment, delivered to this council, was grim. I calculated that a combined council fleet could defeat that vessel only at catastrophic cost. Over 100 ships lost, an outcome no rational strategist would choose to risk. He paused, letting the chamber's uneasy silence settle. That assessment was accurate. It was also incomplete. He activated the display, showing the Kessin corridor engagement. 19 hostile vessels retreating without a shot fired, the convoy passing through safely for the fourth consecutive mission. I have spent the past 3 days aboard the UES Leviathan, Velkarev continued. I have reviewed 20 years of its operational history, verified independently against Council incident records. In that time, this vessel, the single most powerful warship in known space, has engaged hostile targets on 4 occasions. All 4 were defensive. All 4 protected civilian or humanitarian assets. In not one instance did the Leviathan initiate aggression, exceed proportional response, or fail to submit its actions for independent review afterward. Ambassador Tavrek, still visibly skeptical, leaned forward. For confirmed engagements over 20 years, with a ship of that magnitude, proves restraint. It does not prove permanent restraint. Power like this can corrupt eventually. Observer, regardless of past behavior. A fair concern, Velkarev acknowledged, and one I raised myself, aboard that ship, to the very officer commanding it. He recalled Holt's answer, and found himself repeating it with more conviction than he expected. Trust isn't built on the absence of power, Ambassador. It's built on a consistent, verifiable choice not to abuse it, sustained over time. Humanity has had 14 million tons of unstoppable military force at their disposal for 2 decades. They have used it exactly 4 times, always to protect life rather than to end it. I do not believe that pattern is coincidence. I believe it is philosophy, deliberately built into every system aboard that vessel. Medical bays sized for survival rather than combat efficiency. Evacuation protocols exceeding any operation necessity. Weapons designed to end conflicts before they begin rather than when conflicts already underway. He let the data speak for itself for a long moment before continuing. This council has spent 6 days afraid of what humanity could do with a Leviathan. Velkarev said, I would ask this council to instead consider what humanity has actually done with it. 19 raiders retreated from a single ship's presence without a shot fired, an outcome no council fleet has achieved in that corridor in 2 years of active patrols. If deterrence saves lives without spilling blood, is that not precisely the kind of strength this council should welcome rather than fear? The chamber fell into genuine debate rather than reflexive panic for the first time since the crisis began. Delegates who had called for sanctions now questioned whether containment was even the right goal when the alternative, a species choosing overwhelming restraint over easy conquest, might represent exactly the kind of ally the Council desperately needed in an increasingly unstable galactic frontier. Velkarev concluded with his formal recommendation, the words feeling strange and significant as he spoke them. I recommend this Council grant humanity full, unrestricted membership status, ending their probationary period effective immediately. Furthermore, I recommend the Council formally request humanity's assistance in escort and deterrence operations across contested corridors, leveraging the Leviathan's proven capacity to prevent violence rather than merely respond to it. The vote, when it finally came after hours of continued debate, was not unanimous. Old fears rarely dissolved entirely, and several delegates abstained rather than fully commit their trust. But it passed decisively, granting humanity the full membership status they had waited 6 long years to earn. Owen Clark's response, delivered simply over the Council comm channel, carried none of the triumph Velkarev might have expected. Thank you for your trust, Clark said. We intend to keep earning it, one day at a time, the same way we have for the past 20 years. Weeks later, Velkarev found himself once more aboard the Leviathan's observation deck, watching the ship prepare for another routine escort. One of many now, as humanity's role among the Council's protective forces steadily expanded. Commander Holt joined him at the viewport. The two of them silent for a while, watching stars slide past in the comfortable quiet of a ship no longer hiding what it was. You said something to me that first day, Velkarev said eventually, that the galaxy's greatest fear was misplaced. I understand now what you meant. And what's that? Holt asked. Velkarev considered the question carefully, drawing on everything he'd witnessed. The raw destructive power of that first sensor reading, the quiet mathematics of overwhelming deterrence, and above all, the discipline of a crew that carried the ability to conquer star systems and chose, every single day, not to. The Leviathan was never the discovery that mattered, he said finally. It was simply proof of something far more important, that a species capable of building the galaxy's most powerful weapon could still choose, consistently and without exception, to build it only for peace. He looked out at the stars, feeling something settle in him that he hadn't expected 3 centuries into his career. Quiet, genuine hope. That is a discovery this galaxy will remember. Commander, not the ship, the people who built it, hoping it would never have to fire a single shot. Beyond the viewport, the Leviathan's escort lights blinked steadily against the dark, a silent promise carried across the stars that the greatest power in the galaxy had chosen, of its own will, to become its greatest protector instead.